What's good, Zimbabwe and the intellectual community at large? This is your guy Victor Marambi, and welcome to the Enlightenment series. Yes, of course, we address issues bedeviling students and the youth at large, ranging from social, political, as well as economical issues, and of course, not ending on recommendations, but coming up with sustainable development goals that we really implement. And of course, we are at the University of Zimbabwe today, having a conversation on the development of the legal system in Zimbabwe. Once again, we would welcome you to the Enlightenment series, and it's a great privilege and honor today to have the most decorated comrade Gwisai. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Comrade Bishop.
Fantastic. Comrade, it is the desire for everyone to know the picture of Gwisai from the roots coming to the law school and the journey for you to become an advocate today.
Yeah, a long story, but I'm a teacher. I've been teaching at this university since '94. That's about 26 years now. Yeah. And so that's me primarily, a teacher of law. But also, I like to see myself as a flame keeper, a keeper of the tradition of the radical left socialist tradition that we were part of in the university in the late 80s. At this university, when the students really were at the forefront, I think they were the main social force that took up the resistance to both a slide into an autocratic state under Mugabe, but also a deepening of neoliberal economic policies. So I've been a socialist, organized socialist since at least then, since '88 when I came here to the university. But probably one goes earlier in my high school. I grew up in Gweru, right, in the Midlands. I went to a school, I went to a school called Senga Primary School. My parents were in that Senga township, grade 1 up to 7. Then Form 1 up to Form 6, I went to a school called Chaplin High School. An old white school. It's Smith's old school. This was a transitional period when they were changing. So that's me.
And you mentioned you being a socialist and also being a law lecturer at the University of Zimbabwe, and taking you back where you were in the midst of the transition from the colonial era into an avenue where Zimbabwe was free from the colonial list. And how can you describe the development, or we can say the foundations of law in Zimbabwe and the development of the legal system from the colonial era up to date?
Yeah, I mean, look, at one level, there is a change in terms of the apparatus, in terms of who runs the apparatus, the form, but the substance essentially remains the same. I'll give you an example of, I've referred to my background. Went to high school in '82, Form 1. This was a transitional period where the generation were too young to go to war. We just missed the Liberation War, but we're old enough to be influenced by the war. You know, music from Bob Marley, Thomas Mapfumo, and so forth. And I remember when I was in Form 1 at Chaplin on the 11th of November. You know, so you're a township boy who's come to this white school, and on the 11th of November, the white kids were busy, you know, they were having a good time, writing on the board and celebrating. Then one of the guys, Alfred, says, "You know what they're doing?" I said, "No, I don't know." He says, "No, they're celebrating UDI." This was on the 11th of November. It was in history class. Okay. So I then put up my hand, back of the class, and said, "Excuse me, sir." The teacher was Mr. Collins. "Excuse me, sir, is this your birthday today?" He says, "No." Then there was one of the white girls, she's called Trudy. "Is it Trudy's birthday?" She says, "No." And I says, "Can we please rub that off?" And they says, "If you want to rub it off, you rub it off yourself." And so I remember walking from the back of the class, went to rub. I don't know how I managed to do it and get back. But I'm giving that as an example of the kind of situation that we have. When we then came here, in the mid-'80s, late '80s, there was a real struggle about the nature of legal education and the direction of law. So I could identify with that, given my history. There was the faculty, the legal education, and the legal profession, I think, were in a serious, there was a serious conflict of contradictions. On the one hand, there was a strong left socialist, I think, led by Shadru Guto, a Kenyan exile lecturer, Kempton Makamure, and young lecturers that they had mentored, like Ben Tlachwayo, now I think he's a Concord judge. Shepard Nzombe, he's led, and others. But they were, you see, the faculty of law had not been transformed. The faculty of law was the Christie Law School. Richard Christie was the founder initially of the law department. Then it became the faculty of law after independence under Professor Walter Kamba. But substantially, as a superstructure, it remained a facility and a platform to protect and advance the interests of a minority, an elite minority, which had been expanded from the white colonial elite to now include a black elite. But the structure of the law essentially remained one that was designed to ensure continuation of white supremacy in our economy, domination, foreign, imperial, Western domination of our economy, our natural resources. So those were the big battles that were happening, with Makamure Guto spearheading the decolonization of law. Welshman Ncube wrote a brilliant article where he says, look, we just take an example of legal history when you're teaching the history of law. Right until last year, we taught legal history as history of Roman and Roman Dutch law. We assume that law and the history of law in this country is Roman law and Roman Dutch law. You assume that the people of this country have not had a law, a legal system, a state system at all. That constitutional law, that legal history starts in 1890. 80% of our people live in rural areas, have legal relationships, governed by customary traditional law, but the general legal system operates as if that is irrelevant, and is something that is not taught at the law school. So that has been a fundamental problem of our law. There has been inadequate decolonization of the legal superstructure. Probably the first and fundamental breach of that starts with the Jambanja, the land reform program. So the land reform program was a qualitative attack on the economic foundations of Rhodesia and of Zimbabwe as structured from Rhodesia. As Herbert Chitepo used to say, if you're going to understand white supremacy, you've got to understand the white man's control of land. Yeah. So the land reform program resulted in an assault on both the laws and the superstructure of the inherited laws, because you were having a revolutionary transformation of the relations of ownership of one of the main means of production in any society, that is land. At that time, agricultural land controlled by 5,000 white farmers, controlling up to 70% of the most productive land. Over a period of 5 years, they controlled 15 million hectares. Over a period of 5 to 10 years, the white farmers were reduced from 5,000 to 500. The amount of land that they controlled was reduced from 15 million hectares to 2 million hectares. So that was an earthquake. It was an earthquake because to do that then required that you had to confront the legal superstructure that protected that. So we saw the Supreme Court completely overhauled. All veterans led by Chinotimba going to the chambers of the Chief Justice, Gabi, and saying, you said you resign, go ahead, resign. The Minister of Justice, Chinamasa, saying, well, the judges have to do the will of the people, and they cannot expect the state to protect them if they are not doing so. So that is at the structural level. At the constitutional level, an attack on the property level. So for me, that has been a fundamental thing. In relation to legal education, by the time the land reform happens, the socialist attempt at the faculty of law, led by Makamure and Guto, had been defeated physically. Guto was thrown out of the country, nearly thrown back to Kenya. Makamure was detained. And thereafter, essentially, the semi-colonial or neo-colonial structure of legal education in this faculty remained, save, I think, for the great work done by Julie Stewart and Amy Tsanga at Women's Law, which introduced the feminist current in our thing. The only thing that... so part of the result of this was the emergence of GZU, the Herbert Temple Law School. The Herbert Temple Law School represented an attempt at bringing a nationalist dimension to our law. It's made efforts, but I would say that with time, it has also been forced to conform. So we are in a flux in many ways, where the traditions inherited from the colonial thing were shaken, but still remain strong.
All right. Let's pause for a moment and deal with the causes you've brought on table. We talked of the development of law, particularly here in Zimbabwe, and one can view from your conversation that the law in Zimbabwe has been designed in a way that serves a little minority and ignoring the majority of Zimbabwe. And what do you think lawmakers in Zimbabwe should do in order to create an avenue where the law serves the majority?
Yeah, well, look, decolonization, starting off, in terms of legal education, what I've referred to here, the content of our thing. It's only recently, I think now we have blend law, for instance, as a post-grad program. We do not, we also need to bring in indigenous traditional law and raise it. The 2013 Constitution recognizes it. In many ways, it's a progressive law, but we need to raise the status of indigenous law, indigenous legal history. I refer to our aspect of how we teach legal history, how we teach constitutional law in this country. In this country, there is a period of a millennium, 1,000 years of a state, starting with Mapungubwe, Great Zimbabwe, then the various states that you had, the Roja state, ending with the Ndebele state. But we ignore that. So we need to introduce that. We also need to bring in, and for us as legal scholars and, jurists, we have to do the kind of challenge that, for instance, Roman Dutch jurists like Voet van Leeuwen were able to do. They were able to take colonial Roman law and integrate it with unwritten Dutch customary law and bring it up to date. The process, what they called homologation, which gave rise to Roman Dutch law. In many ways, I think that's part of the challenge. And it's a challenge that confronts us as legal jurists to ensure that the law is made more relevant. The Deputy Dean here, Matsikidze, is doing a very interesting PhD, for instance, on procedure in the courts. And in it, his study is seeking to show how the procedure of us, the civil procedure of our courts are exclusionary to the majority of people. They are elitist. And he's comparing them with the procedure in traditional customary courts. And argues that, for instance, as a matter of access to justice, greater access to justice, we should be able to borrow significant portions from traditional law. The symbols, language of the practice of law itself has to change. I remember sometime last year I was in the High Court, and I start off, greetings, Judge, how are you? No, Mr. Gwisai, we're in court. You don't greet the court unless you're in chamber. When you're in chambers, that's when you greet the judge. But when you are in court, you as it pleases, the honorable court, you don't greet. But I said, Judge, Trukukudzadari. In our tradition, when you appear before a court, unokudzadari. That's what we've done. We laughed with the judge.
And I have picked up something in terms of a clear line to say between the legal system and our customs. That's another conversation, but let's do justice to this. When you're talking about the development of law in Zimbabwe, we mentioned a foreign aspect where the law in Zimbabwe is construed from the Roman Dutch, the Roman law. How best can we speak our identity into our legal system in Zimbabwe?
Good. So thank you. I've talked about the language, the symbols, the education. So I'm happy now that for legal history, we now have foundations of Zimbabwean law with 3 key pillars. We will look at general law as colonially inherited. That is your normal Roman and Roman Dutch. We will also look at Rhodesian law and how that influenced and determined our legal system. We'll also look at indigenous customary law. So those are the 3 main pillars of this new course. I'd already started doing it in History of Roman Dutch, but it was informal. But now we formalized it, and we now have customary law, where we must move towards ensuring that customary law, indigenous law, is taught mainstreamed right through, not just as one optional course. It must be mainstreamed right through, because there was a tendency of ghettoizing customary law to simply family law. We want customary law in property law. We want customary law in environmental law, in procedural law, and so forth. So that is to happen. So I talked about symbols. I gave you the greetings. When I graduated and I wanted to register as a lawyer, the High Court would not allow me to register because I had dreadlocks.
All right.
And they said that you are not fit, because to be registered as a lawyer, you have to be a fit and proper person. And the High Court judge then said, no, you are not, Justice Yami. So we took it up all the way to the Supreme Court, represented by the lead counsel was Tendai Biti, assisted by Lloyd Mishi, and who's now a senior lecturer here, and Adin Tochinake, senior lawyer in the profession. And so we argued very strongly that what does that mean to say it's not fit and proper to have dreadlocks? Dreadlocks are a natural African traditional hairstyle. Granted, it frightens white supremacists. They don't like to see confident black people, and so we got it through. So now I see many young lawyers spot on their dreadlocks and so forth. But you still have our judges putting on centuries old feudal wigs that costs apparently tens of thousands of dollars. In South Africa they've removed them, in Australia, in the States, but we still hang on to symbols of colonialism. So that for me is important. Then finally, the language. The language has to be simplified, accessible, and use the languages of our people. Of course, you can't do away with English given the history of colonialism and its dominance, but you have to move up towards indigenizing and bringing into, your Ndebele, your Shona. We've seen recently that Tanzania has now introduced, Swahili as a language that is the primary language in their legal system. Then another thing at my heart, that goes to my heart here is, so yes, we must expand the numbers of law schools. I'm happy with that has happened, so that we have more young people from working class peasantry backgrounds having access to law. But we need to do more. Currently, we are scraping at the surface. The reality of having so few law schools and so low numbers is that we are only taking kids who are probably from middle class backgrounds or working class backgrounds with, those who are able to go to very good mission schools and score these 15 points. We have to change our admission system to include both a consideration of, your points that you have done, but also we have to look at your socioeconomic background. We have to ensure that we have more kids coming from Binga, more kids coming from Cholocho, more kids coming from, even if they're 8 points, even if they're 7 points. When I came to law school in 1988, half of my class would have had 5 points. These are some of your leading lawyers and judges today. I won't give you names. But so we need to also change that and ensure that the students who are coming out are coming from a broader socioeconomic background that empowers peasantry and working class kids.
Yeah, it is the conversation of a socialist, but in terms of you being, you are labeled a champion of socialism, particularly in Zimbabwe, to talk of the legal system and also legal education. Can you explain the relationship between law and socialism in Zimbabwe, maybe in general?
Oh yeah, I don't know about being champion of socialism, but I like to see myself, as I've already said, the keeper of the flame. I belong to keepers of the flames. We live in a capitalist society. Sometimes it looks very difficult because capitalism looks so strong.
All right.
And many of young comrades that we've trained to graduate, become big lawyers, become big business people. It looks like it's impossible. But when we look in Africa today and globally, we see how young people are beginning to challenge the structures of capitalism, the control and ownership of an economy by a tiny elite of people who are the owners of the businesses. And in turn, this tiny elite of people control the state, control the laws, the legal system, they control organized religion, whether in terms of the colonial Christian religion that now dominates, but also in terms of the traditional African religion. They control the they control the education system. So one understands that that result is inevitable as long as the economy is owned and controlled by this tiny elite. And this tiny elite is comprised both of local elites, predominant. Well, now you probably have a mixer, like what in Roman history you had what they called a plebeian patrician aristocracy that emerged, combining the old plebeians, the excluded classes, and the patricians, the traditional elites of Roman society. What you have now in Zimbabwe is a new nouvelle rich, combining the old colonial money like Mikus with the new black rich like your Strive Masiwas, your Tapireis. But overall, you then also have big international business like your Americans, your Europeans, and now your Chinese. So that elite is dominant in our society. It is dominant in the main political parties of our country, whether the ruling party, ZANU-PF, the main opposition party, the MDC alliance. So all those, they pay the homage, they are subservient to this structure. But it is a structure that has failed to deliver. It is a structure today that ensures that 8 million, more than half our population, lives in extreme poverty. They live on less than $1 a day. It is a structure that has seen probably as much as 90% of our young people, of our population, unemployed. Last year alone, 500,000 people lost their jobs. There is hunger, kunenzara, kunzoku. So this is a system that cannot offer a future to our young people, including yourselves. You've done everything that society asks you to do. You've gone to school, you've committed yourself, you get out of school, there are no jobs. This system cannot deliver. It is a system that is meant for the few, for the 1%. Now, we cannot change that. Whilst we will make some reforms within the law, fundamentally, we cannot change that system from the law.
I would like to ask in terms of, at an avenue of appreciating the relationship between socialism and law, particularly in Zimbabwe. For the past few years, how has you been fighting for socialism with the legal tool?
Yeah, well, the point I'm getting to is there are some small reforms that you can get. So, for instance, it means that as a teacher of law, I am able to bring a more holistic understanding of the law away from the narrow positivist approach that the Christie Law School tradition has, but also bring the socio-economic context of the law. I do that. I practice law primarily as a labor lawyer, representing mainly, trade unions, workers' committees, and so forth. But even in that practice, it's very clear to me that as you go up the system, from your lower tribunals, your designated agents, your labor officers, into your labor court, then your high court, into your Supreme Court and Con Court. The higher you go up there, the class character, the anti-working class character of the system becomes very obvious.
All right.
In my experience, it becomes clear that probably, labor cases, if you take on fundamental decisions that concern the interests of the major classes, that is, the employers as capitalists and workers as the proletariat, I would say out of every 10 cases that you have that deal with fundamental questions of labor law, a good 8 are in favor of employers. So you are, and probably 1 in favor of workers, and then only 1 neutral. And it has been particularly heavy in the last 10, 15 years. Our judiciary is now composed of farm owners. Many of them have been given farms. But these are farm owners, just like most of the black elites who are at a stage of primitive accumulation. They are not supported by sufficient finance other than the bit they get from the state. So their own class character, besides their own background, is now heavily influenced by their own current immediate interests as property owners who are employing poor people in the farms. So what all that does to me, it vindicates to me clearly that though young people will seek change, it cannot change, whether a revolutionary change or socialism, but even a democratic change of ensuring that the foreign domination of the economy of this country and this society is achieved. Those who may not necessarily want to go to socialism, but who want a bourgeois revolution to ensure that this country can develop to become like other developed countries. That change lies outside the law.
All right. We're now bringing a different conversation where we are saying we should adopt foreign business avenues and business ideas. But to pause for a moment, we have talked of a structure that has allowed the minority to be economically dominant, while the majority, at some point, they don't have the same privileges. What can you say 1, 2, 3 needs to be done in Zimbabwe to achieve economic self-sufficiency?
Well, look, we had the Indigenization Economic Empowerment Act, which came immediately after the land reform and Constitution of Zimbabwe Amendment number 16, I think, the one that legalized the decolonization of land. Then there was now an attempt at doing the same thing with businesses. So the Indigenization Act then provided that 51% of Zimbabwean businesses that were foreign owned had to be indigenized. That law, there were a few attempts at it, but it was never actualized. But what we have now, and in terms of the challenge, in terms of the law, it would have been to advance such provisions, and they should have been included in the 2013 Constitution. But they were not. If anything, our Section 71 of the Constitution is the most conservative private property protecting clause in SADC today. It reflects, for me, the issue of urgency. So I've already argued that we were only able to decolonize land, not within the Supreme Court, not within Parliament per se, but it was through direct mass action of youth, ordinary people, supported by a radical layer within ZANU-PF and the state, which eventually Mugabe joined for his own self-preservation. Because without having done that, ZANU-PF would have been history by now. Right. So that is how that change was occurred. And that still remains the situation today. If you are going to have real fundamental change that ensures that the economy is democratized, owned and controlled by the majority, it has to be the direct mass action, social revolution by the dispossessed. That has been the history of Zimbabwe. That has been the history of the world. The land reform program was a fundamental decolonization aspect in relation of land. Indigenization, economic empowerment was supposed to be a qualitative growth of finishing that into the rest of the economy. And as I said to you, those kind of changes are found not within the corridors of courtrooms and so forth. They are found in the sense of concrete class struggles between those who possess and own the wealth, and those who work and are dispossessed, as we saw with the Jambanja in the land reform program. But ultimately, and I think you see the weakness, when the Mugabe regime was put under pressure from both local, regional, but particularly Western international business countries led by the United States and the UK, they backed down. they did not constitutionalize the Indigenization and Economic Empowerment Act. What if they were truly radical? What they should have done is to actually upgrade the Indigenous Economic Empowerment Act into the property clause of the Constitution. They didn't and backed down. And this backing down was done by Mugabe. And it shows how frail, how unreliable the petty bourgeois or the national bourgeois of third world countries are as agents of change. It has to be the young people. It has to be the youth, but working critically with the working class. So it cannot be youth students on their own. It has got to be youth students working with the most powerful, potentially most powerful and consistent revolutionary force in society, that is the workers. At the heart of capitalism are workers. If our students, if our youth can then work together with workers, they are the kind of force working with poor peasants who can bring this radical change. And today, after being hammered by imperialism and big business, you know, in the form of these data sanctions, European sanctions, you saw Mugabe back down, and we therefore have a conservative agency. So for me, socialism, radical social transformation, has to come and emerge from primarily the working class, working hand in hand with our youth.
But having a conversation with a socialist and a legal practitioner at the same time, we talk of economical development as well as economic growth being one thing, and how is the another. Talking of the limitation, the point of sanctions that is brought on the table is another level of discussion. Sanctions in Zimbabwe being a legal aspect and being a legal issue, what do you think lawmakers should do to solve that problem?
Oh yeah, I mean we have the Zidera sanctions from the Americans, but obviously supported by their supporters. And the Zidera Act itself is very clear that it mobilizes the general imperialist community to enforce and ensure that Zimbabwe plays within the demands of international capitalism. Well, the legislature, as I've said, is one option would have been for radical economic policies that would ensure that the resources of this country are available for the majority of its people. But those kind of laws can only come if there is, in fact, a social class, an agent that stands for those kind of interests. The contrary is what we've had. And this is a point that I was developing to. The point that we've had a huge assault on workers, on peasants, and on our youth in the last 3 years. Through, in particular, currency manipulation, debauchery of currency, where after October 2018, we saw a change in currency for ordinary people. For international business, their funds remained locked up on a proper one-to-one. But for the rest of society, workers who were earning at this university $500-600 are today earning less than $100. This is how the ruling elites have been able to get out of their crisis, by this massive wage theft. Tobacco farmers were forced to surrender their produce at a currency exchange rate that was fictitious. In fact, real legalized robbery, if you ask me. So at the end of the day, let's go back to what the youth of Tunisia did in 2010. The youth of Egypt and workers of Egypt did in the 2012 revolution. Today, as we speak, the Sudanese revolution. So for me, the solution fundamentally, therefore, is not changes brought primarily by law, but social revolution and social struggles in society, in particular aimed at the economic power of the elites. That is not to say law is irrelevant. It can be used to a certain point. I mean, as a teacher of legal history, I'll tell you, it was the secessios, the general strikes by plebeians and poor people in Rome that ensured that Roman law changed in some instances to accommodate plebeians, in some instances to accommodate slaves. Change does not come from within the system. Change has to come from outside.
All right. And to round up on a light note, You being a former legislator yourself, what do you think needs to be done in terms of minimum qualifications for the lawmakers in the parliament?
Well, I mean, I had an interesting. We went in as MPs from the MDC on the crest of a huge wave of working class youth struggles between 96 and 99. So there was a lot of confidence. There was a lot of a high class consciousness. And one of the things we did, some of my colleagues there, veteran trade unionists, young trade unionists, one of the main things that we did was, we were serious players in the Labour Amendment, Bill of 2002, probably one of the most radical statutes in the post-colonial thing outside the land ones. But these were trade unionists. Some of them in O levels, some probably didn't. So they didn't have formal education, but they had life experience, experience gained from the trenches of struggle. And they were so powerful. And indeed, these are the kind of people who built a party, the most powerful party since 1980. Morgan Tsvangirai was an O-level chap, did not have a degree. So sometimes I hear, so the elites who hijacked the MDC as part of this elite hijacking process at one time were coming up with changes to say a president must have a degree and so forth. So he has got his own problems, but one of the most effective MPs in this parliament is Chinotimba. Chinotimba does not have a degree, but Chinotimba raises some of the most fundamental issues that affect peasants and workers in that parliament. So no, you don't need those qualifications. What you need is full democracy that ensures that members of parliament are accountable. So for instance, I was removed as an MP by my party because I was supporting the land reform and attacking the imperialist friends of America and Britain. Fine, so I was recalled. I accept that, and I think we should deepen that. We should empower the electors and the constituency to say, you, Comrade Bishop, you are no longer representing our interests. They should be able to recall you. Dom Shunga, of ensuring that we have legislators who speak to their people. And also you don't want legislators who live outside their constituency. They must live with the people and not stay in the mansions or the northern suburbs. Although, of course, I didn't stay in my constituency, but that's a story for another day.
All right, just to take a minute of yours, it won't be justice without taking you back in the class of Roman Dutch law, where you made emphasis that the laws needs to serve or ought to serve the interests of the majority, talking of the working class as well as the peasants, not to serve the minority that are politically as well as economically dominant. Taking you on the Zwa case, which are the ruling of the ruling party and the leaders of the opposition in Zimbabwe, ironically spearheaded the downfall of the working class in Zimbabwe. With that case, what message can we send to people out there?
Well, the message shows that deep down at the bottom, our political class are servants of the rich. Our political class are lackeys of the business owners, and that ultimately they may have their power plays about which one of them should be in power and so forth, and they may have some differences on the democratic space that is allowed people. But fundamentally, when it comes to the issues of the stomach, the issues of eating, they are there for the eating of the few and not for the majority. And Zua is a very good example of that. You saw leading players in the main opposition, being lawyers representing a big multinational, but with major local interests, with local ZANU-PF politicians, to smash and hammer the working class, and to smash and hammer the working class to return Chibaro, to return colonial legal labor law. So, working class, you are on your own. You must demand real substance. Don't just run around saying fair or mkomananga apinde. Demand real change as you did in 1998, 99 to control and run society, because you can.
Of course, it was a great privilege and honor to have a conversation with the most decorated socialist here in Zimbabwe, our comrade advocate Gwisai, comrade, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you, and wishing you the best.
Thank you so much, comrade. From Victor Marambi and the crew behind the scene, until next time, it's a goodbye.